Sorry, Gurpreet, I guess, is on his way. Okay, approval of the agenda. Oh, where's the screen here? Let me see the screen. Nothing. Oh, sorry. I can move all the way here. Okay, moved by Councillor Vicente. Declaration of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. Seeing any? Seeing none. Anything under consent? There's nothing. So we'll move on to staff. Nothing on announcement, delegation. Staff presentation. So 6.1, and we'll bring 7.1 forward, I guess. Bring it all together. And it's by Mr. Mandel, the protocol officer of the clerk. Expense policy. Yeah, sympathy, sorry. Sympathy policy.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, Chair Fortini. Good morning, members of Governance and Council Operations Committee. I'm Teresa Mendler, the Protocol Officer in the City Clerk's Office. With you this morning for your consideration is an expression of sympathy policy. It provides guidance on services that could be offered by the City upon the death of a current or former member of Council, a current City of Brampton employee, and it outlines commemorative activities as a symbolic gesture of collective mourning. It could be considered housekeeping in nature, as the City does not currently have a council-approved policy that guides our expressions of sympathy, although we are responding with these expressions of sympathy currently as situations occur. When the Protocol Office was established within the City Clerk's Office in late 2018, it was given the mandate to oversee expressions of sympathy in response to death. So the recommendation is, so currently the City Clerk's Office or other departments are coordinating these responses in consultation with the CAO and the Mayor's Office. Expressions of sympathy applied in the past have included the lowering of city flags, a donation or floral arrangement, and a statement by the Mayor read at a council meeting. The proposed policy will assist staff with providing council-approved standards and consistent methods. It applies to the death of a current member of council, a former member of council, a significant community member, a current City of Brampton employee, as well upon a significant event where the city would facilitate an expression of collective mourning. And we saw an unforeseen increase in some of these tragedies in the form of vigils that we held in early 2019. This proposed expression of sympathy policy has been benchmarked with other large Canadian cities, some of which include Toronto, Calgary, and Mississauga. Should there be a desire to name a city asset on behalf of a deceased, the appropriate procedure policy for acknowledgement is in accordance with the asset naming policy. So that does not fall under the expressions of sympathy policy before you today. For background, Council approved its first flag policy in March 2019. It includes provisions for lowering city flags in the event of a dignitary or high-profile death, as well as 6 special days where the flags at all city facilities will be lowered yearly. So for your consideration, the proposed policy includes expressions of sympathy that could be applied in the unforeseen death of a current member of council. In discussion with family, there are options listed here that the city could apply, including lowering the flags, coordinating messages, recognition at the next council meeting, establishing a book of condolences either online or in person at City Hall, an expression of sympathy in lieu of flowers, maybe a donation as per family wishes, a letter or card from the mayor and city, an arrangement at their seat at the next council meeting, city flags that the family could use on the urn or casket, coordinated honor guard services, and arranging for council or staff to be present at a memorial, as well as providing seating, greeting, and VIP support at the service. Additionally, for the passing of a current mayor, we would provide as well honor guard, potentially laying in state in City Hall, which we've seen at other cities in the past few years, with public visitation hours as determined. For a former member of council, the policy includes expressions of sympathy that could be applied in this unfortunate death, in discussion with the family. These would be consistent with the current members of council with a few expressions removed. So we would not do a floral or candle at their seat because they're not currently a member. We would not necessarily arrange an honor guard service for them either. For example, in July, on July 31st, former Brampton City Councillor Peter Richards sadly passed away. In consultation with the family, the City Hall flags were lowered, and the mayor read a statement at the August 7th council meeting that was also posted with the notice of half-masting. The policy also includes options for the discretion of the mayor and staff in consultation with the protocol office to express sympathy upon the passing of an elected official or dignitary who has represented the city of Brampton, either at the provincial, federal level, or someone who has made a significant contribution to public life. So the flag policy already indicates a number of individuals that we would lower the flag, but this policy would allow the city to do maybe that next step if it's so desired, including coordinating statements, establishing a book of condolences, an expression of sympathy, a donation, a card, and sending a representative to a public service. For a current employee, the city, in discussion with the family, may offer a number of activities as well, including an internal communication to inform all staff, a flower or donation as an expression of sympathy, and arranging a representative to attend any public service. If the policy does not, however, impede any of the standards of our Brampton Fire Emergency Services Department in regards to honoring their members who have passed away in the line of duty. For your consideration, the policy also includes commemorative activities that could be applied at the discretion in result of an event. So recently we saw 3 community gatherings that we hosted. That would be something that this policy would cover, as well as establishing a book of condolences either online or in City Hall, coordinating public statements, and arranging for representatives at a public funeral. That's my presentation. Thank you.
Okay, seeing none? So motion to receive the Councillor Vicente. Okay. Peter, just a discussion. Councillor Dillon came in late. He wanted to reopen the agenda. He wanted to add something. We have to.
Mr. Chair, that would be up to the committee.
Yeah.
Before we get to that, we need to take a vote on receiving and adopting the staff recommendations.
All in favor? Passed.
So if
Councillor Vicente moved it.
through you, Mr. Chair, if Councillor Dillon wishes to reopen the approval of the agenda to add an item, it would be a 2/3 vote.
Okay. All in favor?
What is
To
the
open
nature of the
agenda?
item?
What's the nature there, sir? Oh, there's no button here. Oh, sorry.
It's okay.
A discussion on the use of City of Brampton corporate seal for councillor use.
Sorry, can you repeat that? Use of
Corporate seal?
there's corporate seal for
Use of the
councillor
corporate
use.
seal?
Wanted discussion on that.
Certainly.
All in favor for reopening the agenda? Passed. Okay.
So,
So
Mr.
I'd
Chair,
like
that
to-
would be listed under new business.
New business.
Which would be 8.3.
Okay, so moving on, we have a presentation, 6.2, by our clerk, Peter Fay, City Clerk, Council Handbook Update.
Mr. Chair, this is just a information update for members of committee. You will recall that the council handbook was issued in December of last year at the start of the term to be a reference guide for members of council and subsequently for members' staff in regard to the new corporate or the new council office staffing model. Just this last week, we have done our first update to the handbook. This is a live feed of the handbook that is online. It's a public document. We have updated it to include references, proper references now to the new council office support model, and all the updates in terms of the pages that have been updated are listed here for information of those that are looking at this document. The document itself, just to reiterate, is a 3-volume document, almost 200 pages, I believe it is. It deals with the first volume on daily operations, so you as a member of council, your salaries, your benefits, your budget, your staffing, how your offices are set up. The second volume is on decision-making, your role as members of council, the role of staff, the council decision-making process, the role of the clerk's office, meetings, agendas. And the third volume is on accountability and transparency, so we'll provide some general information on the role of accountability officers defined under the Municipal Act in terms of the Code of Conduct, the Integrity Commissioner, the Lobbyist Registrar, the Ombudsman, and other references that are in the Municipal Act. So if committee wishes, we can go through as a refresher, or I'm sure you're all familiar with the items that are in here. I think your staff use this handbook on a regular basis, so it has been updated to reflect the new model. We are also planning to do an additional update in December of this year as council moves through, perhaps with the budget process and other decisions that impact the council office, and your role as members of council will be providing another update before the end of the year. So I'd be happy to answer any questions, or if it's the will of committee, we can go through the document itself.
Sorry, repeat that. You're on the board there, or are you posted from before? Okay. Councillor Santos?
It's actually Councillor Vicente.
Actually, it's me,
Oh.
but that's okay. Through you, Chair, to the clerk, does the council handbook describe in particular detail any details with respect to declarations of conflict of interest?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it does, and I believe it does under the Accountability and Transparency section. It does reference the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act and some of the obligations under there.
And through you, Mr. Chair, it provides a definition of what a conflict of interest is and how it's described by the Municipal Act.
Through you, Mr. Chair, it probably isn't verbatim, but it gives an overview of the requirements.
Okay, thank you. And in addition to that, I'd like to ask through you, Mr. Chair, in terms of code of conduct, what information is provided in the handbook with respect to those rules?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the code of conduct is referenced, and there's actually a link to the code of conduct. So instead of trying to duplicate what is in the code, the premise for this handbook is to link where possible, where original source material exists. So it links to the code of conduct that exists today, and just provide some general information. But the expectation would be members would be going to the code itself for the particular rules, the 18 or 19 rules that exist.
And through you, Mr. Chair, that code of conduct says here applies to the mayor and members of council. Does it also extend to our staff?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I would say indirectly it does. There is a bit of a gray area. So there is an ethical framework that a council office ethical framework that has been established through this committee earlier this year with the new council office support model that tries to set boundaries and rules as they apply to political staff that are now hired by the councillors. And that ethical framework is appended to the employment offers and effectively helps to form part of the employment contract between the city and that individual supporting a councillor. And it does speak in there to the notion that actions that a staffer may take on behalf of a councillor could have implications for the member of council under the Council Code of Conduct. The Council Code of Conduct, as a document outlined in the Municipal Act, is specific to members of council and members of local boards, and in our case, it will eventually apply to committees. We will be working with our Integrity Commissioner this term to come up with a light version of the Code of Conduct to apply to citizen-based advisory committees. So a long-winded answer to say indirectly it does. I have always interpreted that the actions of a political staff person reflect the responsibilities and accountabilities of the member of council. So those are things that members of council should take into account when they're working with their staff.
So through you, Mr. Chair, perhaps I'd then invite the clerk in the future when there is opportunity to provide an update if we require a workshop or some other form of discussion to remove the gray area and define it more clearly as would be appropriate. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Vicente. We're going through a workshop at the region now, I think, going through all the code of conducts, because a lot of them are, like, you know, we get golf things and you're only allowed $700. Maybe we should do the same thing here, and hoping they combine, because it's confusing. We have to file, register stuff on our code of conduct, and then the region, it depends where you go, so maybe work together, or have a workshop, all of us together, see if we have to make some changes.
So through you, Mr. Chair, there is a tentative workshop scheduled already for September 30th, 2 weeks from today. It's an all-day that's already been set aside in your calendars. At this point, half a day will be set aside with the Integrity Commissioner, and the intent is to review the Council Code of Conduct, review other related policies, the Respectful Workplace Policy, the Council Staff Relations Policy, as they apply to members of council. In regard to the suggestion about combining with the Region Appeal Code of Conduct, I think originally they were designed to be similar, but each municipality is responsible for adopting their own code. So while they're similar, I don't know if there's anything that we can compel that they both be merged.
Okay, thank you. So, receiving of the report, Councilor Medeiros, all in favor? Okay, so we'll move on to 6.3, another update by our City Clerk, Pierre Fay, a new council office support model check-in, including office ethic expenses framework.
So, through you, Mr. Chair, to members of committee, you will recall that council made decisions earlier this year on changing the support model. I just wanted to do a recap because one thing I just want to reinforce is this committee is charged with the responsibility of being the steering committee and conducting annual reviews of the council office support model. So I'd like to have this as a regular item on your agenda going forward. Just to recap, there's a lot in here, but really council decided early in 2019 to move to the political support model, that there would be executive assistants and possibly administrative assistants. There would be an ethical framework for council staff. The expense policies would be updated, the council handbook would be updated, the budgets would be updated, and most of that work, I'm here to report on what's been completed and what still has to be done. So in terms of the work plan, you may recall a similar slide to this that we've presented to previous Governance and Council Operation Committee meetings. So this takes the last slide and puts it into bullet form in terms of the work to be done or has been done. In terms of staffing, councillor staffing, either secondments or contracts, are continuing and are supported. At this point, I checked this morning, I believe there are 16 staff that work for the various councillors across the 10 members of council in the council office. There is the council office assistant, who's the 6th floor reception, which has been implemented. That is an employee of the city clerk's office. In terms of the council office management and ethical framework, which I spoke about a few minutes ago, that framework has been included in employment terms and conditions for new hires. You will recall that there was a council workshop held on May 13th and 14th of this year. The May 13th dealt with a number of different aspects in your role as a manager, in particular dealing with expense tracking, IT resources, space accommodation planning. So that training was provided to you on the 13th, and then on the 14th, there was a session from external HR resources that went over with members of council on the nuts and bolts of being a people manager. You may recall that session occurred over at Alderley. Future amendments are planned for later this fall to align with some HR policy reviews that are underway. There are a number of HR policies for which political staff working for the councillors will have to abide by and do have to abide by today under the ethical framework, and we need to make sure that the framework is aligned with those new policies once they're adopted. The Governance and Council Operations Committee is serving as the steering committee. We're doing this update now. We'll do a further update at the November meeting and subsequently as issues arise. Policy and documentation updates. The mayor and councillors' expense policy was brought forward to this committee back in May and was subsequently updated in June of this year through council resolution. The council handbook, as I just pointed out, has been updated as of September. The council staff relations policy was adopted in March of this year. We will be reviewing that at the September 30th council workshop, and that is the workshop that we've identified here that should be in your schedules already for 2 weeks from today, in terms of meeting with the Integrity Commissioner for at least half a day on code of conduct and council staff relation matters. Accommodations have been completed in terms of workstation changes that were required as we transition to this new model. In terms of the financials, individual councillor cost centers are in effect, and work is underway. I think there's been meetings with each of your offices, either planned or held, to preview the 2020 budget as we move towards that. Communications, council made a decision in June of this year in terms of moving to 2 newsletters annually per ward pairing and 2 for the mayor, so that work is underway. And technology supports are in place, and I know a number of members of council have decided to proceed with implementation of the Civic Track, which is the contact management or customer relations management. I think that's what CRM stands for, application implementation, and that's a subscription service. I wanted to very quickly touch on the fact that just last week There was an audit for members of the Audit Committee that KPMG conducted on the Council Office Support Model. There were 4 findings. I've distilled them down in terms of the points and the work that's underway. The first point is on councillor and support staff. The finding and recommendation was the need for some central point of contact for councillors and their staff for onboarding, training, and communication. Points of contact exist within the clerk's office, myself, or my team members, and in human resources in terms of staffing, as and when needed. There have been some formal opportunities in terms of training. I mentioned the May workshops. There have been a lot of informal opportunities. This past August, we held 5 2-hour sessions each Friday in August for the members of council and their staff to come out and talk about informally, a number of issues. Some of the issues discussed over those Friday coffees in this council chamber included the role of legal, the role of enforcement, zoning, animal services, parks and trees, conflict of interest, adding new business to council meetings, accountability and transparency, officers and their roles. We will continue those informal training opportunities. We're planning additional drop-in training opportunities later this year, and we will be working on some more formal training opportunities for yourselves and for your staff. And we will continue to communicate that to you. The second bullet point, finding from the KPMG audit was on councillor expenses. It called for a consolidated approach for expense claims categorization, coding, and approvals, and automation of expense submission approval process where possible. There is a guideline that staff identified at the audit committee in development, and there will be refresher training for the council office, and there's continued efforts to automate the accounts payable process. In terms of the third recommendation on capturing councillor expenses, there was the finding was a process for expense allocation to each councillor and training on that. Again, procedures are in development on internal cost capture and reporting, and then refresher training will occur for the entire council office. And finally, there was a finding about an annual councillor declaration to ensure understanding and compliance with employment standards and policy. And this picks up on some of the responsibilities through the training that happened on May 14th in terms of your role and the nuts and bolts of being a people manager. The council workshop, as I mentioned, is tentatively scheduled for the 30th. It will be talking about the council code of conduct and other related policies. Also, we'll be touching on employment standards and your role as a people manager. And at that workshop, the intent is to have members of council sign off on 2 documents. One is an understanding and acknowledgement of the council code of conduct, which is spelled out in the council code of conduct for an annual sign off. And secondly, in reference to this audit point, to sign off on your understanding of your role as a people manager in regards to the Employment Standards Act. So, Mr. Chair, that's just a quick update of where we're at, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. And if I'm not the expert in them, there are experts in the room here to answer questions on council office implementation.
I got 2 people on the board. Councillor Dillon.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question, but a comment first before that. I think can't speak for Councilor Medeiros or for Kini, but as a member of council from the last term as well, I think this model has proven to be very beneficial for, as I mentioned, I can speak for myself in terms of getting work done. And so it's a decision of council that I think was a good one. Just a quick question for you though. The time sheets that staff fills out, I think bi-weekly, is there not a better process that we can go to? I know in some companies, like the previous companies that I worked for, any staff would, if they're taking a vacation or leave day, they'd only fill it out then. Otherwise, it was pretty automatic. And so,
through the chair, yes, the city is actually working on on modernizing that whole feature for time capture, scheduling, not just for the council offices, but throughout the city. There's technology out there that does this much more efficiently. We're looking at implementation in phases beginning at the end of next year.
thank you.
Councillor Vicente.
Thank you. Through your chair to the treasurer. Do we have a timeline on when those changes would be implemented and therefore available for use by members of council?
Through the chair. So we'll be getting likely in the last quarter of 2020, and we'll be implementing that in phases throughout different city departments.
So a year from now, essentially. Okay, thank you. Through you, Chair, to staff, how, when we report our expenses, our expenses are updated every month on the city website, and one of the line items includes essentially staffing reporting on how much our staff are being paid. Does the reporting differentiate staff and contracted services in that line item?
Through the chair, so the salaries component would include the political staff that are hired by each of the councillors. The contract staff would show up under professional services account as a separate contracted service.
Okay, so for the staff item, that would only be the reporting of political staff being paid for directly by the city with benefits or under contract or as a secondment. Would that be correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And if a member of council were to hire someone under contract, but as an external service provider, that is reported on a separate line item?
Through the chair, that's correct.
Okay. And in terms of, for purposes of transparency, what obligations are we to provide detail on what that contracted staff does for the council office?
Through the chair, we would receive an invoice from the individual or the company that is doing work on behalf of the council member. The details of what that work would be included on that invoice, and that would be included in the description for that service provided.
Okay.
So in line with the expense.
So through you, Mr. Chair, so there is a difference from an accounting point of view between contracted staff or full-time staff or an external service provider. Would that be correct?
That's correct. So political staff are paid through our payroll process, while the consulting or professional services are paid through a check requisition process.
Okay. I have no further questions at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. I got a couple of questions. Can the chair be heard?
Yeah.
So, I'm looking at our pay stub, and when we established this, our budget, we never ever talked about outside consulting. It was about getting our staff. They should have been going through HR and all. So really, anyone could get a consultant from outside and just pay them under an invoice, which that $200,000 that we put aside for our budget, we never mentioned anything about consultant fees. So I'm looking at Mississaugas, and they're not allowed either. And they show everything, even a mail, a package, the payroll of the person who's on the payroll. It shows everything. Here, it doesn't show nothing. It just shows a full amount. It's not accountable or transparent to our residents, saying, well, you're spending $175,000. They break this part up and how many people you have hired, how many people you're paying, who's on the payroll. It doesn't show nothing. Compared to Mississauga, it shows the people they have, the employees and all. So, and a consultant, anybody could open up a company for $50. You don't need an HST number unless you over the 32,000. You do the taxes, and then they send you the HST number. I could give myself an invoice, and really, you're just pocketing taxpayers' money. That's transparent. That's the way I see it. It should be on the payroll line by line who you have, and it should go through HR.
Through the chair, I just want to keep in mind that council wanted more discretion as to how they spend their budgets. So that was opened up. With some exceptions under the council expense policy. Council wanted that more discretion as to how they spend their budgets on different items.
Well, I never heard anything about the consultant at the time, and anyway, I'll come back to the board. Councilor Medeiros.
Thank you, Chair. Just for, I guess, clarification, because you have an added agenda item regarding the subject. Are we going to deal with this matter now?
No, since
I'm just
Actually,
wondering,
let's move it forward, and we'll come back to it since it's already on the agenda for further discussion. Yeah. So, because it's under 8.2, so, can we get a motion to receive, sorry,
Councillor Dillon's on the board.
Councillor Dillon, sorry.
Sorry, for 8.2, is it just a discussion on the consultants? Like,
Yes.
Is that, is
Just
the
on the
discussion done now?
consultants. Yeah, so if you have any questions on this presentation, you can ask.
Oh, so I just wanted to just mention that during the discussions for the new council model, I recall the conversation in regards to consultants, because it's a conversation that I had with the clerk and staff as well. Just an FYI.
Well, let's discuss that on 8.2, since it's already up for discussion. So,
Are we on
presentation from
are
our
we on
city clerk,
8.2?
PFA. Can I get a motion to receive that? Councilor Maderos, all in favor? Passed? Okay. 7.1 we dealt with. Other new business, so we got the discussion on city calendars, 8.1. Any questions on the calendars?
So, Mr. Chair, this is just one slide, and really the intent is just to close the loop on the council calendar. There seems to be agreement not to proceed with council calendars anymore in favor of council newsletters, based on the report in June, but there are motions and resolutions of council that sort of suggest that this will continue. So my recommendation is that the recommendation at the bottom of this slide be adopted by this committee to finally sort of put to bed and end the council calendar.
Okay, very good. All in favor? Motion. All consent? All in favor? Thank you. Oh, sorry. Councilor Dillon, you on the board still?
No, it's okay.
Okay. Okay, Sherman? Okay. Yeah, okay. So, Councilor Vicente moved it. All in favor? Passed. Okay, so we'll move on to 8.2. Now is the part where we could discuss on the using of the consultant. So, Councilor Dillon, you had some questions? No. Oh, okay. Councilor Maderos.
Thank you, Chair, and I thank you for bringing this to for our discussion purposes today. I guess to our city staff, and Peter, maybe you can comment. Just from reporting, so the first aspect which I'm concerned about is understanding that there's consultants there who are meeting with our staff on a sole basis. Basically, whoever is engaging with these consultants, the fact that these consultants don't adhere to the same, regime in terms of confidentiality, corporate expectations, et cetera, that my assistants do. And second is my concern of free reign around council office again. I thought we nipped this in the bud before, that consultants, when they come, or outside visitors, and so that's been a concern. And after our corporate reporting, when it comes to, my understanding, a consultant would be someone who has a registered number, has a business that he registers. And if you look at our expenses, it doesn't state what the business service is and what service he's providing. So I think that's the bare minimum that we would expect to understand. And so it's one thing that when you're getting consultant services, it's another thing if effectively they're working for you as basically someone who works for you as a staff person. And so I think there's no consistent recording and application of what his or hers relationship is with us in the corporation. So, and I see a host of legal issues as well. When you have, my documentation and I see him or her consultants, people that are not on the employee list, but then after in fact represent councillors vis-a-vis our staff and vis-a-vis other assistants, meeting with other assistants. So that to me, there's a host of issues around that. So I don't know. I know it's a two-ended question. So one is reporting. So So I'll first go to our finance director. I don't know if you can.
Through the chair, so in terms of the reporting, you know, we in terms of what we're able to report is limited to what is included in terms of the descriptions on the invoices and/or further follow-up with our council members regarding what the expense entails. In terms of making payment, we require an HST number or a SIN number, depending if it's made out to an individual. So we require that in order to make the payment on that. In terms of just the overall reporting, really, it's you know, up to council to decide how much information specifically we want to include there. You know, in doing some benchmarking with other municipalities, I wouldn't say necessarily that our what we report is much different than other municipalities at this point.
Now, through the chair, would other municipalities have that information where they have the company or the person listed as a consultant and what they're consulting on?
Through the chair, it wouldn't necessarily say specifically what they're consulting on. It may just say consulting services. It could maybe be potentially specific to some type of work they're doing on a project for a council member. So it will be different when you look at different municipalities as to what they report. But again, I don't think we're out of line with what others are reporting. We've taken a look at some other reports from Mississauga, Vaughan, a couple other municipalities, and in fact, I would say in some cases we report slightly more detail than some others.
So through the chair, what would, for example, you mentioned Vaughan, Mississauga, what would they have under consultant services?
So we were looking recently at, I think it was Mississauga and or Vaughan, and really all they had was professional services account, and then it just said consulting services beside the expense amount. So it didn't even reference it didn't reference the company name.
Okay. Now, so now through the chair, in terms of now to Peter, in terms of again, or I'm not Peter, maybe HR. I'm just trying to see the contractual relationship, because how do consultants get access to our staff? If they're consultants, if they're providing consulting services to councillors, how do they get access to our staff?
So perhaps I can start through you, Mr. Chair. So I would treat a consultant in a similar vein, quite frankly, as a member of the public. So they're guests. To my knowledge, unless there's authorization, they're not issued access passes, accounts, things like that. The city has multiple consultants that are doing various work, operational and otherwise, across the city. And the terms of reference for their engagement and level of access is based on the circumstances of the engagement. But most times they are external expertise coming in to help, and they're treated as that. So I would treat a consultant coming up to the 6th floor very similar at this point to a guest, and would have to be accompanied and the responsibility of that member of council.
So now, Peter, through the chair, in terms of the terms of reference would be all public, or we can get access to terms of references from consultants that work with the city of Brampton. How much of that information is public?
For you, Mr. Chair, some of it would be public. It may depend on the nature. There are provisions under the Municipal Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act that speak to some confidentiality based on the nature of the service that's provided. There may be something that is proprietary, so it may depend on the type of service and the engagement that the city has engaged them in.
No, and I guess to our CEO, then I guess you want to mention, it's just, I guess it's concerning when I hear councillor consultants are meeting with our staff, you know, and consultants are providing services to a councillor, meeting with our staff on issues that I guess none of us are privy to, requiring, you know, information that staff's time is being used, and I don't know the nature of the relationship. If it's simply an employment relationship, and then after this is a budget item that they're using to pay, then I think that's ethically someone who's trying to circumvent circumvent the process and when it comes to reporting. Because ultimately, when you have someone who's doing employment, providing services for you, working in that nature, they're essentially your employees. I think consultant services would be something that would be, they provide a service, a tangible service, and there's a sort of time limitation, a duration. And it's just, I think it's one of those, and understanding we're going to a new process, but it's one of those loopholes after that I think that we have to address as we're implementing this new model to ensure that we're all transparent and understand. But it is, concerning when our consultants or working for respective councillors are meeting with staff on issues and speaking on behalf of councillors. I hope that doesn't occur. Or even the nature relation of volunteers. Because again, the issue of seeing people roam around the 6th floor, I have my documents there, I have people who I'm meeting that are not privy to, and these people don't have the same sort of employment regime and relationship, so there's a security risk there, and there's a liability, and that's concerning. And so I'll weigh in and I'll get to hear my councillors, but I still feel that if staff is spending time meeting with consultants, and I don't know if that, or volunteers. I've seen volunteers meet with several staff around City Hall, and that's concerning as well. So I don't know if you want to comment, but we can, that's fine. I'll just leave it for the other.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to clarify, when I had mentioned previous that, we had the discussion when we were, when the staffing model was brought up earlier in the year, I was referring to consulting such as, for example, legal or any type of subject matter expert. But I will say I'm a little bit confused as to what Councilor Medeiros is speaking to in specific. And so perhaps maybe if you can kind of delve into it a little bit more of the specific examples that you've seen.
So, Councilor Medeiros.
Thank you, Councillor Dillon. My understanding is that there are several situations where there are consultants that are doing work for councillors, and essentially they're almost as employees, but they're being paid out of another sort of bucket. And yeah, all I'm saying is that the nature of the relationship should be such, in my opinion, that if there are a representative working on behalf of a councillor, that it should be paid and noted accordingly. As I have 2 staff people, and their services are there, and they're paid as such. So I don't know what constitutes a consultant. I guess we heard the explanation, and I'm just simply saying, if we want to continue that, and councillors have every freedom to use as many as consultants they want, that in terms of our reporting, it should be noted the consulting service or the corporation or the company and essentially what the service is. So that's a motion that I would put on the floor in terms of staff coming back to us on how that type of information, in terms of any consultant services that we're using, basically what's the corporation's name and what service they're providing. So it could be developing a youth strategy. So I'm not looking for detailed information, all that stuff, but I think it should be for the public to understand what possibly councillors type of services you would need for consulting. So I think that would bring transparency instead of just leaving a number and saying professional services. If you're getting legal advice, if you're developing a strategy with a certain ethnic group, that's fine. But it should be noted what you're doing and what the corporation's name is. So I'd put that as a motion for a report back. And how much time do you think you would need to do something like that, to report back? A month? Or when's our next membership?
The next meeting is November 4th.
So I'm fine with that. Are you okay with that?
Through the chair, I am, yes.
Okay, I just wanted to add a couple of things on there before I jump onto my speakers. I'm going through Mississauga in Vaughan. There's no such thing as that I see is consultant. When we did this budget for us councillors, it was supposed to hire an EA, an AA. We got a budget, everything was supposed to be transferred. We never ever talked about any consultant. So have we have invoices out now for consultant fees paid? Because it doesn't show on people's, doesn't show on mine. I don't have one, but I'm just saying.
There have been fees paid to consultants for professional services, yes.
They have been paid already.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And so we have to state it here, it just shows as an expense on the total amount, or does, or I'm looking at bonds in Mississauga, it doesn't show anything about consultant fees on it.
Through the chair, it depends on whether those councillors have incurred those types of expenses. If they haven't incurred consultants, or brought on consultants, then they wouldn't have anything showing on their reporting.
And I'm gonna go back to Councillor Dillon. I remember when we started this process, the consultant was in case we needed legal. It wasn't to hire outside consultant. We have already 2 assistants, now we're going to outside consultant. So I'm gonna support Councillor Madero's. I'm gonna add an amendment that I don't believe we should have consultant. We have enough staff. We had 1 last term. We jumped to 2 or 3. Now we're also having consultant fees. So, you know, anybody could open something up. It doesn't take much to open a company and send an invoice to me as a friend or anybody. You know, at the end of the day, it doesn't show nothing on the paper as consultant. It costs $50 to open a company and get an HST number. And it doesn't go to that person. It goes to the company, the check. So at the end of the day, that's not transparent. I don't believe in having any consultant fees. We always had, one time we had 1 assistant, 2 counselors, then we went to 1-on-1. Now we opened this budget, but now again, I think we're going overboard. So I'm gonna support him bringing it back. And if there's any other invoices, until we actually make a decision, I don't think nobody should be paid under consultant fees this time. Because, you know, just like I said, because we never ever talked about consultant through our $200,000 budget we had. It was about bringing a budget, AA and AEA.
So through you, Mr. Chair, perhaps I just need to clarify. In June of this year, this committee dealt with the mayor and councillor expense policy and updated it. And in that policy, and at this committee, there was discussion about discretion members would have for their accounts, because originally it was set up under the pretense to have a salary-related account and a non-salary-related account. And there was an amendment moved, and it actually is in the term of council expense policy now under 4.2C, that members of council have discretion to decide how to spend their overall council budget in accordance with this policy. Note, remuneration for members of council is fixed and established by council through the Council Compensation Committee. So the intent of that was to allow full discretion to the members to how they spend their entire budget, save and except for their own salary, as long as it fits within the policy framework.
Okay, and I get that, but it doesn't show nothing on their paper. It's not accountable. It doesn't show nothing. It just shows a total amount. We should put the employees, how many we have, what we're paying and stuff, more, not a full amount, because at the end of the day, it just shows 1 amount. So where's this money going? How can we be accountable to the residents of the taxpayers? Okay. Councillor Williams?
If I could just make one comment too. There may be some contracts in place, so if you were to move ahead with some sort of hold on making payments, there may be contracts in place that state making payments at certain points in time, and then there may be penalties as a result of that. So I think we just have to be cautious of that moving forward if there's contracts in place to pay individuals.
Yeah, sorry if I may, I was just going to jump in. If there have already been services rendered, I think there's an obligation on the city to actually pay those expenses, but it's something that we can certainly explore and come back in November for sure.
I get that. Whatever's been done, service has been done. Anybody has to be paid. I'm saying from today on. You know, anybody did anything in the past that deserved to be paid, they're not in fault.
Yes, to the chair, there may be some challenges with that. I believe there's some contracts in place for making payment to individuals.
So how do we get contracts in place when we, through the hiring process with HR? It's a consultant. I ask for your legal advice or your advice. You send me an invoice, I pay you. What's the contract got to do with it?
Again,
I hired you under contract to stay with me 2 years, 3 years? Is that what you're saying?
So it's a contracted service, correct? So it's like a professional service, but it's contracted service for a company or an individual.
For a year, 2 years, it depends on the contract you have?
Correct.
I don't know. I'll listen to my Councillor Williams.
Yes, thank you. Through the chair, is it possible to get the motion on the screen so we can see what it's saying?
So there is a motion moved by Councillor Medeiros that staff be requested to report back on consultants being used by members of council and how the type of services provided could be reported for transparency, to report to the November 4th meeting of the Governance and Council Operations Committee. And Councillor Fortini had introduced a possible amendment that until such time as the report's considered payment not be provided for any such consulting invoices received. But staff advised there already may be some agreements in place.
So can I change, sorry, Councillor Williams, can I change that to whoever's been invoiced until now be paid, but from today on, to put holding in those contracts? Because someone provide the service should be paid. I don't want to hold anybody back on that.
Through the chair, so what I would maybe suggest is that, that no new contracts or consulting be initiated and any services rendered be paid. That way, if there's a contract in place that is sort of ongoing, an ongoing commitment, that continue on so that there's no penalties to be incurred.
No, I don't want the contract going on, because I never knew about a contract from day one,
Sorry, so I think.
as far as I know. So
Councillor,
under
if I may,
my thing is, and I know I'm a little bit confusing, when we did this model, it was whole to be accountable, transparent to the taxpayers. Hiring consultant, I only have one assistant. I still have almost $200,000 still in my budget. I could get a big chunk of that and go to people I know. It's a consulting fee. It doesn't take much to open a company. That's not being accountable to the residents.
Correct. So if I may, I think the motion moved by Councillor Medeiros will bring the transparency that this committee is looking for. The second sort of motion that's being considered that Councillor Fortini's put on the floor, I think if we simply change that to say that until such time as the report is considered, no additional commitments be made for any more consulting services. If there's already been a commitment made, then it'll be captured in the first bullet that asks about us bringing back the transparency and reporting on terms of what consultants are being used by members of council. But we can certainly say that no additional commitments be made over and above what's already
No.
been made.
I'm not going to accept that. The additional means anyone who signed a contract is in now. And we and the other people who doesn't have a contractor end up losing. So if we're going to stop it, we have to stop it for everyone and for none. Us council, the councilor's office only I'm talking about.
But through the chair, if I may, if there's already been a commitment made, so let's say, and I don't know, but let's say a member of council's already made a commitment to a consultant to say that for the next 6 months, consultant X is providing whatever that service is, then there might be already a commitment made that you can't necessarily stop. But it would be reported based on Councillor Medeiros' motion.
And I'm only talking about the council's office. I'm not talking the
Correct.
corporation.
No, so am I, only in regards. I don't know whether there's members of council that have already made a
So
commitment to
I'm going
consulting
to give
services.
HRs. So I'm going to give you an example. I want to get rid of my assistant. I ordered, 2 weeks, 6 weeks? If there's a penalty now, I'll have to face the penalty. It comes out of the budget or whatever. But from now on, I'm just saying, anybody that did in service in the past should deserves to be paid because we didn't know about this. I never knew about a contract until councillors brought it to me and I added it to the agenda. When I found out about it, I said, how can we get contractors consulting when we have already 2 or 3 assistants working for us at the end? So I'm saying if there's a penalty, it has to be paid. So from today on, no more invoices done. Wherever they did the service, I believe they should be paid.
But if I may, there's a difference between a contractual service with a corporation that may have already been made and an employee contract that you might have as part of your assistant. There might be, as part of an employment contract, a severance provision within that. When you're talking about a consulting service with an outside corporation, there might be other additional liabilities that you open up. You can't, to say, depending on how that contract was originally worded, I don't know whether you can simply say we're terminating as of September the 15th.
What's the consequences?
We don't know that.
Well,
I'm just asking
you know,
council not to sort of put that in there without knowing what those consequences are. Because you
Well,
might be opening up the corporation to certain
Whatever the
liabilities.
consequences is, it should be faced. As far as I know, before this came as a consultant, hiring a consultant, it should have come up to us. I didn't know it was under the expense policy. So now if we're facing, I don't know how many councils have it, this was brought to me, so I added to the thing. I was a little bit disappointed to hear that we have outside consultant when we have our regular assistants doing things. So I'm going to keep it as of today on, and whatever we face, we face. I don't want to change it. I want to leave it that way. As of today, no more consultant fees until a report comes back. And whoever's been in the past should be paid for their service. That's one in the council office, not across the corporation. Councilor Medeiros.
Thank you. Through the chair, I guess you raise a valuable point. I guess the confusion I would have, and maybe David, you can chime in here, is the relationship of this contractual agreement, which is 2, 3, 4 years, is individually between, respectively, a councillor and this consultant. So the corporation should not be impacted by that relationship, because that's something that the councillor has gone into. I think the max budget is $25,000. They have a max budget that they would use. And if we don't go further, if we make a decision today and we say, well, everything that you've done already, let each respective councillor pay what they have to, but going forward, you're not allowed to use that budget for, or, you know, if we get rid of that budget item or whatever we do with it, the contractual arrangement is with the councillor, is not with the corporation. So I guess part of the advice coming back would have to be, so I'm fine to defer this part, maybe Councillor Fortini, and maybe respect with legal, just to ensure liabilities. But I think the spirit and the nature of what I'm starting to understand is very concerning. Because essentially we went to a new political model to provide that services. Councillor Dillon, very transparent. He has, I believe, 3 people under that is listed. Very transparent. And he simply could have done the same thing. And what we find now, if I'm suspecting, is that possibly, and I don't know, councillors are, going around the system, using it to say that they don't have 3 employees, that they have maybe 2 or 1, and they're using consulting services, and that person effectively is acting as an employee. So then after my question to you, what I need to come back is, are they providing, what's the nature of the consulting that they're doing? Are they writing emails? Do they have access to city emails? Are they touching privacy information? So when my assistant gets information from a resident, they ask the resident, can I share your email? Can I share your contact? So as soon as they touch that email, before it goes to corporation, there is that understanding. And she has a contractual agreement with us. So all those rules and regulations, protections, laws, everything is there. Yet, we have someone there who, if they're providing consulting services or touching people's emails, getting access to documents which are internal, there is a lot of concern around this. And again, I have no problem if someone wants to go out, maybe contrary to Councillor Fortini, I have no problem if someone wants to go out, get consulting services on a matter and get that advice. Communication strategy, that's fine. I don't care what they do with their budget. But then at least the corporation or the individual should be listed and what services are providing. So I think there's huge ramifications to what we're doing. And this is part of, I guess, the growing pains of us going to this new system. But I'm just concerned with how these consultants are being used. Being consultants, even volunteers, support of volunteers, is the access to our information, the access to our upstairs, and then after, to a certain degree, if these people are providing the nature, because I guess we have a strict definition of what consultant services are. If they're touching emails and doing that stuff, that nature of the relationship, there must be some legal interpretation that says, well, that's not the nature of the relationship. They're not providing consultant services, they're actually working for the individual. And that raises a lot of issues, so I don't know. So I think part of it, maybe we can defer this, Councillor Fortini, if you don't mind, for when they come back to next member services and provide that legal advice. Yes.
If I may, from what I'm hearing, in the spirit of what I'm hearing, would we be okay to revise the first, Councillor, your direction to also include not only reporting back on the consultants, the type of services being provided, but also the relationship between the consultants and staff? Because I think that's kind of where you're getting at in terms of access to our network, access to buildings, things of that sort. So
there's
we can
no way
sort of
they should be
encapsulate
meeting
all
with
of
our
that.
staff
and we can bring it back to council.
If they're developing a communication strategy and they want to meet with their staff, there's no reason whatsoever the consultant working for the councillor should be meeting with their staff on A, B, or C. Because their expertise, they're supposed to be providing expertise. Why do they have to refer to our staff and get that expertise and get that information? So I don't know. I guess for the services they're providing for the councillor, usually when consultants meet with staff, they're developing a broad strategy which they're helping the corporation. There should be no interaction, in my opinion, that a consultant was providing consultant services to a councillor with staff. There should be minimal. And if there are, then we should all know about it. You know, who's directing our staff to do what? Why are they directing our staff? What's the agreement? What's the, you know, so it's a practice which I'm disappointed to hear about, and I could be wrong, but you know, but if they are trying to go around the system and we are noting the people that we work for, it just sends a bad message to, I think, the public on how we use these resources and when we went to the system. It provides that black mark to when we ultimately want to provide good service to our residents, and then we hear that this stuff is going on. So anyways, I look back to, and I agree with what we want to hear in terms of liability, in terms of access and all that other stuff. Thank you.
Thank you. I just worry about the liability, and I get what you're saying. I just was a little bit disappointed to hear that we have consultant. What about our assistant when they print their in-camera and they got access and it's private?
Through you, Mr. Chair, your assistant should not be touching in camera. It's only for yourself.
Well, they do the printing.
Then
there's it's there. So a lot of the stuff. Like they do at the region, it comes up to us with a number. She does my printing. She does everything. We have that loyalty there. Councillor Dillon.
So is this the amended motion that's going forward? Sorry, just a question though. Sorry, can you get it back up?
Sorry.
Sorry, where it says, sorry, for services rendered from this point forward, it's currently the contracts, I don't know who the contract is to, but the contract, is it currently within the rules that we have in place now? So whoever's being given a contract, it says essentially that no payment be provided going forward. Are they within the rules now? They're not breaking any rules, are they?
Presumably, yes, without knowing the specifics. We're talking around the head of a pin for not talking about the specifics. Professional services can include consulting. They can include photography, writing, creation of pens, paper, all that kind of stuff. Those are professional services that members of council may engage in.
Right.
So that would be a relationship between the councillor who's asked for the service
Right.
and the professional service that's providing the service.
Right. But can we presume that there's something, that there's false services being provided or that there's any rules being broken? I don't think we can presume that. So I don't know if this last part is appropriate, that we say no payment be provided going forward. And I think when the report does come back and the council decides to pursue something different, I think, you know, this should remain as is.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think the intent for services rendered from this point forward was the attempt to try to stop any additional payments for professional services that a councillor may engage in.
So somebody who's currently under contract, that they no longer be paid going forward?
That may be the intent, and staff have provided advice that there may be risk associated with that depending on the nature
Right.
of the professional services
So
agreement.
I was wondering if maybe staff could respond.
Through the chair, I think actually what we were intending from that friendly amendment was to suggest that if the councillor, or effectively the city, because it's a contract with the city, if there's already a commitment in place to provide some sort of ongoing contracted service, that payment be made, but that a councillor not enter into a new agreement
Right.
for a service. So, you know, if there was no agreement before and now going forward, that they're not able to enter into that agreement until after we bring that report back on November 4th.
Okay, and so this motion here basically says what you just said right now, is that correct?
That's how I interpret it.
So,
So perhaps to be helpful, where the last highlighted yellow, it should be for new services rendered from
Yes.
this point
Right.
forward.
That might be
New
helpful.
services.
new
So,
services.
can I just interrupt you there? You keep talking about the corporation. It's not under the corporation, it's under the councillor. It's under me. My assistant is under me. I have to deal with her. It's got nothing to do with the corporation. That's how the model was done when we did the hiring. We're allowed to go through HR, we have to do interviews and everything and going in. So, you keep saying that the corporation will be like, well, it's not, whoever has a consultant, it's up to them as a councillor. It's got nothing to do with the corporation. The contract was done with me as a councillor, not with the corporation.
Through
Do I-
the
do I
chair,
still have
I would
the word?
suggest that we defer that topic and let legal give us an opinion. I'm not sure whether if a councillor is making a commitment that's obligating the city to that commitment or not. I think what you're suggesting is that when a councillor makes a commitment to a consulting company or a service, that it's the councillor that's making that commitment,
Yeah.
but I would like legal to let us know whether you're actually committing the corporation to that or not.
Okay, we could add that.
Sorry, do I have the board still?
Sorry, do
So, so essentially what we're saying in this motion now is that, if there's an existing contract, you know, that stay as is, but there's no new contracts going forward, is that correct?
No. No, we're saying is that,
Through the chair, the way I'm reading this is if someone is already if a member of council has already made a commitment to a consulting service, and that service is sort of contractually obligated to carry forward, we would have to look at what the legal implications are of stopping that. But certainly what I'm reading is that the expectation is that from September 16th onwards, there is no new commitment to any more consulting services until we come back and confirm exactly what that relationship is going to look like and what sort of this policy is going to
But
dictate.
existing contracts remain as is.
no.
So what I would
Because
say,
there's
existing
could be
contract,
legal ramifications for that.
if there's an existing contract that's already done that it can be terminated at any time, then I would leave that up to council to make that, or committee to make that recommendation. If you've already committed to a consulting service where there's an obligation to continue with that service and that payment, if we arbitrarily say from this day forward, you're not going to be providing that service and you're not going to get paid, there might be a liability on the city.
Well,
So we need to just tread very carefully.
Yeah,
on-
I think,
on that.
I agree with what you're saying. I think there could be some legal ramifications if we terminate a contract right now. So maybe until a legal opinion is provided to council or the committee that the contract continue, but at the same time, no new contracts be given to anybody. I think that's the safest way.
Well,
Because you can't just cut a contract right now. I think you should have a legal opinion first, and then, and if you want to make a decision, then go forward.
and I agree. So I'm just going to jump in there 1 sec. So let's say 2 councillors or 3 councillors or 4 councillors have a contract already with a consultant for 3 years. They're allowed, and a new councillor now, I want to get one. I'm not allowed because we put this motion forward. And that finds it unfair for 4 or 5 councillors to have consultants and others don't because we put the motion forward. So I'm saying, in the past, whatever they did, if there's invoices outstanding, they deserve to be paid. But as of today, until we get legal advice, we stop every councillor, not one. We can't have, just because I signed a contract with a consultant for 3 years, I'm entitled to it, and Councillor Vicente or Councillor Maderos is not, because I already signed a contract. That's between me and my consultant. It's got nothing to do with the corporation. It would be unfair.
Through the chair, but I think that's where we need to get some clarification. I will say the following, that I think council's original intent months ago was to provide the utmost discretion to all the councillors to manage your budgets accordingly. And whatever you wanted to spend on, as long as you stayed within your budget, you were trying to allow yourselves to do that. Now what I'm hearing is that there's a desire from some council members to start putting restrictions on what you can spend that money on. So we really need to take a sober second look at this and make sure that we get this right And I wouldn't necessarily jump just to say from this point forward without knowing what those consequences are. I think it's prudent that council wait for the right advice so that we don't get ourselves into any trouble.
Okay, and I'll agree with Councillor Dillon. Before I get back to him, if this would have been on here 5 months ago, 6 months ago, we would have brought it up then. I don't see any consultant fees on here or professional use on that, like other municipalities do. We would have caught it way before. I was surprised to hear this last week. I added to the agenda. I did not know.
So
And
through the chair,
that we could actually go out there and hire a professional, and I
I'm
could get
not
someone
aware.
doing my job for me.
I'm not aware of which contracts have been signed or not, but it is possible that in the first couple of months, maybe there wasn't any consulting contracts, and that's why you don't see any of those expenses. I'm not familiar with the details.
Okay, Councillor Dillon, you still on the board?
No, and just to finish off, though, I think I agree with what Al is saying, that we wait for the legal opinion, and then
That's fine.
if there's any decisions that need to be made, we make it after that.
Councillor Vicente?
Thank you, through you, Chair. In listening to the conversation, I agree that one of the primary goals of going to the new political model was to give members of council the freedom and their own discretion to make decisions on how they choose to spend their budget to achieve the goals that they have in their wards. I think that we're skirting around really what the problem is here in terms of discussion because nobody wants to say it. But the clerk touched on it just a second ago lightly, so I'll just try to build on what the clerk said. So if we hire an external service provider, I want to call it that, to assist in our office, and they're providing services to our office, those services could include preparing materials, assisting members of council with their workload, or it could also mean engaging with the public either one-on-one or through email or through social media, for example. And in all of those interactions and activities, it would be my expectation, I certainly think it would be members of council expectation, and I think the clerk would certainly agree with this, that in all of those interactions, that whether it's staff or an external service provider, that they are meeting the code of conduct and that they are following all of the city's rules, and to borrow an expression from the clerk, that the work that they do fits within the policy framework of our council office. That's really, I think, what we're trying to get at here. It's not to say that a member of council cannot hire someone to work for their office. Yes, it should be properly reported, and I think that the treasurer has clearly stated that staff and expenses related with staff is reported as one line item, and that contractors, external service providers, or other hired help is listed as a separate line item. And I see the treasurer nodding to confirm that what I am saying is in fact what is happening now. So really what this all boils down to is, do consultants have to abide by the code of conduct or ethical framework when they're doing their work and are brought on by members of council? If, to go to the clerk's example, if that member of staff is taking photographs on our behalf and then posting those photographs on social media, whether through our channels or through their own, they are essentially being hired by that council office and should comply with all of the regular rules, framework, and code of conduct. And I think that, and I asked the question of the clerk earlier when we were discussing the other item, does the code of conduct extend? It certainly applies to the mayor, it applies to members of council, and it should apply to council staff and any other organization that they choose to employ. And so I think that that's very important. When the city, for example, hires an external firm, for example, an audit company to do auditing for the city, they may discover or come to certain conclusions and findings. And then when they come to those conclusions, they don't go to the media and try to undermine the work that is trying to be done here by the city. They wouldn't say, oh, look at this, the city of Brampton is doing this or doing that wrong. That's not within the goals that we had when we hired them in the first place. And so I think that this motion, and I agree with Councillor Dillon in that I wouldn't want to impact any office members' current arrangements that they may have with any service provider that they have currently in their employ. But what I think is important for us to get to the heart of the matter here is that every member of staff, members of council, and any person that is in their employ is fully following the code of conduct and the goals and objectives of the city and that council office. In other words, if a member of council were to pay an external service provider to go on social media and engage with the public, they wouldn't be critical in their social media posts of past council decisions, or they wouldn't try to use, as we know on social media, sometimes it can get quite dark and nasty, to use social media to leverage public opinion in advance of a council decision. I think that that's very important because those individuals, whether they are myself, a member of my direct staff, or an organization or an individual in my employ being paid for by taxpayer dollars, to be working to undermine any other member of this council. And so I would want to add as a friendly addition, I think, not an amendment, that whereas members of council are required to comply with all the code, with the code of conduct, that also extends to all council office staff, and I don't know how you want to word it, external contractors or external service providers, whether they be corporations or individuals. And I think that really gets down to the heart of the matter here and really what we are trying to achieve through this conversation, if I read between the lines.
Okay, before I go to, I just want to ask a quick question. What's the maximum we could pay for a consultant fee?
It'll be a must.
Is there a maximum? Or it just goes along our budget, that's all we have?
Well, effectively, yes, you would be limited by your budget, but it would have to follow the procurement policies as well of the city.
What's that?
$25,000
Per year?
per instance, effectively.
Per invoice or per year?
Through the chair, I believe the procurement bylaw is very specific. Once you exceed a certain financial threshold, then it has to be competitively procured. I don't think there's necessarily any maximum amount that anyone can spend on a consultant. It would just have to be procured in the proper fashion and then be reported. From a councillor perspective, you're limited to what your council discretionary budget limits you to. So if you have $200,000 in your discretionary budget, for example, you can't go out and hire a consultant and make a commitment for $500,000. You'd be limited to what you can spend within your budget.
So my question is, I have $183,000 left in my budget. I can make myself an invoice every day for $20,000, $20,000, $20,000, $20,000 until I run out?
Mr. Chair, I believe I still have the floor.
Oh, I thought you were done, sorry.
No.
Go ahead.
I think it's well understood that as members of council, when we expense items to fulfill our goals and the desired outcomes of our offices, that we comply with all of the financial accounting rules of the city. So we have a maximum budget of $200,000, excluding staff, right? Which includes our staff. But also the procurement rules would still always apply. But I want to be clear, and I know the clerk is just adding this into the motion, that this isn't a new requirement that we are setting in stone here today. This is, contrary to what the clerk said before, it's a gray matter. I don't think it's a gray matter at all. That this is something that is expected now, in the future, and also in the past. So if I just look at the motion here, so whereas members of council are expected to comply with the code of conduct, and that the code of conduct extends to all council staff and external service providers, contractors hired by members of council. Because this isn't something new. This is something that is now, today, and was before. Madam and Mr. Clerk.
Okay? You done? Yeah. So my question was, again, I'm allowed to, a maximum of 25,000, so I could give myself, through a consultant, $20,000 per week, and it's approved because it's under the 25,000 threshold, and so long as I got money in my budget. Or it's a maximum of 25,000 per year. That's what I'm trying to figure out, per invoice.
Through the chair, I don't know what the maximum per invoice is. I'm not sure there'd be a maximum per invoice. What you're suggesting, of course, you'd be breaching your code of conduct, and I think the point you're saying is if you've got room in your budget and you wanted to spend that on professional services, could you spend it on professional services? And the answer is yes. How you would go about spending it, whether you wanted to spend it all $183,000 in once or spend it based on the services $1,000 a week for the next 183 weeks, that would be up to you, and you'd follow our procurement bylaw and our purchasing bylaws. But once again, councillors have their sole discretion on how they would spend their money. So if you wanted to spend it on professional services, the balance that you have on $183,000, you'd be able to spend it on professional services.
Okay, I get that part. So how do we know, we should have a list of professional services we could go to, or we could just pick anyone we want and I could go get someone and say, go open a company?
Through the chair,
Give me
as I
an
think
invoice
the
for
city clerk talked
$60,000.
about professional services, there could be all kinds of different things that fall under professional services, and it would be up to the councillors to determine what they'd want to spend on professional services. However, knowing that if Councillor Maderos' motion is passed, understand that on a monthly basis that would be transparent and it would be made open to the public, and everyone would be able to see exactly what professional services you've contracted, what you've contracted them for, and how much money you're spending on those contracted services, should council adopt Councillor Maderos' motion.
So, going back to, can we look at Mississauga involved? Because I don't see anything about consulting in their budget, they're not allowed. So if we would have had it on ours, we would have caught this, 5 months ago, 4 months ago, earlier. It doesn't show. So let's look at what they do. Okay, Councillor Williams, sorry.
Yes, thank you, through you, Chair. These are all separate motions? Are we voting on them all together, or?
So through you, Mr. Chair, I believe we've moved Councillor Visante's motion up to the front to almost be a whereas, as an introduction to Councillor Maderos' motion. I understood from the councillor's last comments that was the intent.
Okay. So Councillor Fortini's motion, just as a friendly, can we add the words members of council? Because it doesn't really specify who, so.
For all members of council, yeah.
Members of council.
And through you, Mr. Chair, just to clarify, when all members of council is used, that vernacular is usually referred to the mayor and councillors.
Well,
And is that the intent?
We meant only us
Members of
councillors,
council.
not the mayor's office.
This discussion is only restricted to the 10 members of council?
Yes.
Then
Because
we'll
the
need to
mayor always
clarify.
had a budget in the past, had nothing to do with us. Ours is new, so it's only for us to.
So members
thank
of council is mentioned in also the top, right? So we're using members of council for the three.
The 10 members of council. Yeah, right.
So just for clarity, is committee looking for just the 10 members of council
Yes.
for the additional expenditures, or just the 10 members of council for the transparency?
What it says there.
For
Stop.
the entirety of the
No
three,
further commitment for additional service made and payments provided. Also, I hate when it says no further commitments, because if there's a contract already in place, right, then three councils, if they have a consulting contract, they're okay with it, but whoever doesn't is gonna suffer for the next 3 years. That's what I'm saying. It had to stop
so-
as of today, and I'm not worried about what the liability is gonna be.
so just through the chair, we're not suggesting that we're gonna pause it indefinitely. What we're saying is we're gonna pause it until we come back in November and get clarity around the
Okay,
entirety of
okay,
the situation.
that's-
Not that
that's
it's a
great.
permanent, you're not doing it anymore. That's the
Yep,
way I read it
Yep.
anyways.
okay.
Until we come back to the November
Meeting.
committee meeting, when we provide additional clarity at that time, then committee members will decide how to move forward, once you get the advice from staff.
Okay.
But-
Councilor Williams, still on the board? No. Okay, Councilor Maderos.
I guess I'll come back after.
Okay.
Thank you, through the chair. I guess Councillor Vicente, you raised a couple of things which I think we need that clarity, and that's why I'm looking forward to the advice. One, you talked about someone providing professional services to the councillor. And we hear contractually we're going to verify what's the liability of the corporation via the councillor. And then we want to apply a code of conduct and extend it. And my confusion is usually we don't extend a code of conduct to a consulting firm or to anyone providing consulting services to us. Is that correct?
Through the chair, typically, I think what we're talking about is if councillors wanted to make commitments to professional services going forward, included in that language would be certain terminology that would say the expectation of the corporation or the councillor is that you're not defaming the corporation, you're abiding by our code of conduct, and that would be an obligation that would be placed on the professional services provider. Which then there'd be sort of provisions there in terms of termination clauses, action that the city could take should that professional services provider not abide by the code of conduct and the city's expectations. That's the way I would interpret that.
And through the chair, again, all this time that we're spending again on this issue is again one of these things that drive me crazy. It's resources, it's the time we're spending on this, and basically what we're talking about is the professional services is someone that we, or people that are presuming to work on behalf of a councillor just simply don't want to be paid out of one budget and want to be paid out of another budget. So now we're going to go back, waste all this great staff time, all these legal services, legal advice to come back in a month to realize, here's all, like ultimately this was about providing that discretion to the councillor, providing the best service. So if a councillor wants to go out and grab someone, have professional services and work on their behalf and do whatever they want, I'm fine. Should be noted what they're doing. Now, what Councillor Vicente was referring to, someone going in, touching our agenda, working on stuff, via work with staff, that nature of the relationship is very different. And this is where now we have to go spend time and do the do's and do the don'ts and what you're allowed to do. So again, because of one or two councillors wasting all this time for us debating something, one, basically them just trying to mislead on how they pay their employees. And that is to me the frustrating part. I should be right now supporting but we have to, and again, part of our duty is to be that watchdog and is to call on what we find is not, best use and respecting taxpayers' dollars. But that contractual relationship, when you have someone who is on social media attacking other councillors or attacking corporation, then what's that contractual relationship? And how's it noted and what's it noted? So there's just raises a bunch of questions and simply, could be resolved by simply just transferring and have that person as an employee, as everyone else, and, enjoy and do what you want. So that's essentially, and it's disappointing. I'm sorry, staff have to deal with this garbage. And I'm sorry, this is again another show that we put on in Brampton. It just seems that no one consistently, we put in these new rules for everybody, and it just seems people spend their whole time on how to break these rules. Where are the loopholes? What can we do? How can we get through this? And again, the spirit of what we were trying to do gets distracted, and I'm sure when this goes in the media, it becomes another, show, and we basically undermine all the great work that we're trying to do. And it starts putting into question the fact that we have this discretion, we went to this model. So, I don't know, it's just disappointing all across the board. Thank you.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair, to the clerk. Just a small housekeeping or wordsmithing amendment here to the first part. Legal Beagles would point out that, as per my comments, the code of conduct exists, applies in the future, but also applies in the past. So I'd like to add an S to the end of the word extend, because it should be extends. It is a present tense item. So that the code of conduct extends to all council staff and external service providers, contractors hired by councillors. And I would humbly ask that the mover of the motion for Councillor Fortini's portion, I don't want to restrict what members of council choose to do, who they choose to hire, if they have contracts ongoing now. I don't want to somehow affect their ability to continue with those contracts. I don't want to stop anyone from hiring new services. I'm happy to see that we are reaffirming that everyone needs to follow the code of conduct, and that we will have staff report back on how these line items are reported in our expenses. But if we could ask just for that portion that restricts council offices now and going forward until the report comes forward, I would ask that that be removed, as I don't think it's necessary.
I didn't understand. I was trying to read this. Sorry, councillors. I'm just saying, I wanted to say, like, whoever has an invoice should be paid. But from now on, to make it fair for everyone, just stop it at this moment and until we come back with a new report. If there's a contract in place and they have an invoice, they should be paid. It doesn't mean we're going to carry on with that contract. It has to stop. Or else, if we bring it back next on the 4th, and we decide whoever has a contract, whoever doesn't, that means me with one assistant, I'm left out. And it's very unfair for whoever has a contract, which we never knew about. You could do a contract with consultants. That's the only difference I'm trying to. So I don't know how we want to word it.
Through you, through you, Chair, if I still have the floor, to the clerk, when the wording says in payment not to be provided for any such consulting invoices received, that essentially
Received from today on, it should be.
that essentially is restricting a member of council's ability to conduct their work. Would that not be the case? And is contrary to the spirit of the political model that we all endorsed earlier this year. And that's, I think, where I'm trying to get at.
Through you, Mr. Chair, if
Mr. Clerk,
the intent is to pay invoices that have come in for professional services, pay invoices for any work that's been completed, but any new work, whether it's in a contract or not, be held in abeyance pending this report coming back. Is that the intent?
Yes. That way it'll be fair for everyone at the time, because if I want to hire a consultant myself, I won't be able to after, or yourself, or anybody else. I don't know if you have a consultant or what.
So through you, Chair, so if it is worded that until such time that as the report is considered that no further commitment for additional services be made by councillors, full stop.
No, not further commitment. That means no further commitment, so for people.
That no further commitment for additional services be made by councillors. But,
No commitments and payments from today on. Commitments is one thing, you have a commitment. And for us,
so perhaps, can we change the word further to the word new? That no new commitments for additional services
That's the
made
same.
by councillors and payments.
And what about the past commitment, if you have a contract with the
They
past?
should be
It's the
paid.
same.
They should be paid.
They should be paid, but doesn't mean I don't want the service providing from today on. That's what I'm trying to say.
No, that's, and that's, through the chair, I think that is restricting a member of council's ability to fulfill whatever covenants or commitments they may have made with the provider, both in the past, and to your points, if those commitments are expected going forward, you are asking for those services to cease.
I'm asking whatever service has been provided should be paid for.
Yes?
New service should be put on hold, all new service for everyone, because it doesn't stop me from tomorrow when signing a contract with a consultant company and giving an invoice for $120,000, $130,000.
Through the chair, I believe what this says is you are not able to go out and get new contracts and new services starting from this point forward. But if you've already made a commitment, and I don't know, but let's say you've made a commitment for professional services for X, Y, and Z, and that contract takes you out until November, for example. That person that you've contracted with may now have a financial case if we arbitrarily say your contract is now done today. What we're suggesting is, even though you have $183,000 left in your budget, if this is passed today, you cannot go and commit it to professional services now because it would be a new commitment. And so you would have to wait until we come back with the staff report, and then this committee would decide how to move forward based on staff's input. So we're saying no new commitments, but if you've already made a commitment that you cannot get out of, we cannot just arbitrarily say, we're gonna stop paying you today.
But that's
All.
unfair.
Well, fair or
If you-
not,
what
those were
happened-
the rules that we had in place, so that's what we have. But I would ask, with the spirit of what's been saying, what we're saying is no new further commitments be made, nothing new be made. But if you've already committed to something and you can't get out of that commitment pending the results of the report coming back, then we might have a financial obligation and a legal commitment to move forward with that payment.
So if I made a commitment for a 3-year contract, that means that we're committed to pay that guy a 3-year contract? Is that what you're saying?
Through the chair, it depends on the contract. I'm not privy to any of the contracts. We would have to look at that. We would have to see what the termination clauses were. We'd have to see what the details of that's one of the dilemmas we have when we make sort of this new sort of expenditure policy where councillors are allowed to have that absolute discretion. We don't know what you're committing yourselves to or what you're committing the corporation to based on, we're just saying that you're gonna stay within your budgets. So I don't know what commitments have been made to who.
I'm just a little confused because that budget at the beginning was to hire AA and AA to have our office model, not to go out and give money out to consultants. Now all of a sudden, someone's got a 3-year contract. We gotta keep them, and if I want one, we're not allowed to do it.
So,
Through the chair,
if I may, because I'm still on the board, the use of the word consultant perhaps doesn't quite describe what a member of council may be doing. I think it's not a member of staff, it's another service provider, an external service provider that is providing support services or product to the councillor's office. And so if, for example, a member of council, a councillor, just to word it as is here in the motion, if a councillor has hired an external service provider to provide ongoing internet or web support for the next 3 years, we wouldn't want to have the motion worded in such a way that now that member of council needs to suspend that service and no longer pay for that service, because then that puts that member of council at odds or in conflict with that provider. And I think that if it's council's decision to suspend further hiring of external service providers or contractors, that's fine. I don't expect the report to take too long. But I wouldn't want to restrict any member's ability to continue to fulfill any covenants that they have with any person or individual or corporation.
Well, okay, I just find it unfair if we put a stop to it, whoever has a contract, that means they're allowed to keep the consultant, and us, we're not. And that's not fair. That's all I'm asking. So, a lot of times, if it's our responsibility, if I don't like my assistant, what she's doing, and I have to send her home, I go through HR and sends her home and pay her the penalty, and it comes out of my budget. And when you do the rehiring, I hired 5 students, I have to go through HR and everything to come through my office.
So through the chair, like, the motion as it's worded, doesn't restrict council staff. It is only speaking to outside contracts or services. And I think the spirit of what council's trying to achieve here is that no new arrangements are made until a report comes back.
And I'm fine with that, so thank you, but my suggestion is always, if we do new, whoever has a contract already signed, that means they're allowed to, and it makes it unfair for me or you or anybody else who doesn't have one. So, it's just like eliminating, and it's not the corporation, it's ours. Councillor Dillon?
Can we call a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes? Yeah, just vote on it now.
So through you, Mr. Chair, the question's been called. All members of the committee have spoken, so we need to take a vote, which is a majority.
Record a vote.
A recorded vote's been requested on calling the question. All those in favor of calling the question, please stand to be counted.
On calling the question?
no, I didn't want to refer to vote on that.
On this, on the motion.
On the motion.
On calling the question. It's on the motions.
Yeah.
Just call the question.
Yeah, everybody in favor of calling the question? Okay. Passed. Okay, now on the motion, you want to record a vote? Record a vote has been called on the
So
on the
through you,
motion.
Mr. Chair, there are 2 parts to, there are 2 motions. We'll deal with the first one first because they are separate. So it doesn't matter which one goes first. So the first would be the Councillor Medeiros motion with the friendly amendment from Councillor Vicente, and it's the top 2 paragraphs. All in favor of this motion, please stand to be counted. Showing in favor is Councillor Dillon, Councillor Williams, Councillor Medeiros, Chair Fortini, Councillor Vicente. Mr. Chair, that motion carries unanimously, 5-0. The second motion is Councillor Fortini's motion, which is the last paragraph. All in favor of this motion, please stand to be counted. Showing in favor of this motion is Councillor Medeiros, Councillor Fortini. All opposed to the motion, please stand to be counted. Showing opposed is Councillor Dillon, Councillor Williams, Councillor Vicente. Mr. Chair, that motion loses 2-3.
Okay, that's all done. So I don't need, yeah, we can go on to the next item. So that's Pete Dillon's on 8.3 on the corporate seal and the new business.
Thank you. So this is just a general discussion. We've had some members of council now who, when they send an official letter out, they've got their seals made where it simply just says City of Brampton in it, and they'll put their name and their title on that seal. And so I'm just wondering if there's a policy in regards to that. And I know at certain different other levels of government, they have a standardized seal, which they do have. And the only thing that they do edit is the name or the title, the position of it. And so I think when we do send official letters or any type of documentation, I think if we do have something that's standardized from every member of council, I think it might be more appropriate. And I think instead of having one, that we have some type of uniform seal. So if you guys get what I'm saying, do you understand what I'm talking about? Because I know when we put a seal on a certificate or when we put a seal on a letter, it's that gold seal that we stamp. And so I'm just seeing if there's any policy in regards to that right now.
So, sorry, can I clarify? So you mean that seal that we actually put our name
Yeah.
on it, that we buy?
Yeah.
There's no, we've always been doing this.
So through you, Mr. Chair, I'll start by saying we'll put it into 2 camps. There's 2 seals. There is the official corporate seal, which is maintained by the clerk's office. That's used for official legal documents. It's used on bylaws, original documents that are executed by agreements, subdivision agreements, development agreements, land agreements that the mayor and clerk sign. So that is a corporate seal that is no different than any other corporation, because at the end of the day, the city of Brampton is a corporation. And that is a legal seal that I would say is separate and distinct from what you're referring to. So that should not be used indiscriminately. That will only be used for corporate documents, and it's only used for city documents. The only non-city documents it is used for is for pension documents for seniors that some external foreign jurisdictions require a seal from the municipality, from the clerk, so we do seal those documents. In terms of whether it's a sticker or whether it's a embossed steel seal that members of council wish to use on some what I would call sort of community engagement or ceremonial documents, whether it's certificates of recognition, the mayor uses a seal for proclamations. Those are entirely within the purview of the members of council. But they are not official documents that sort of give legal validity to a document.
Right. So when I entered the last term of council, even when we were, when I asked where the letterhead was, there's really no letterhead. And so I had to kind of design one myself, and comms came back with one. Can there be a council seal that really does not, it could be official for council, but for our certificates or any type of proclamation that we can use for our council purposes that have not really for corporate purposes, but for, as I mentioned, the letters or the proclamations.
So through you, Mr. Chair, I would say yes, but I would say it should not be something that's council, because the council seal is the corporate seal that's maintained in the clerk's office that goes on bylaws. And that's an official seal. If an individual member of council or all 10 or 11 members of council wish to have their own seal for those ceremonial documents, there's nothing preventing that from happening.
What can we use, though? Can we use the City of Brampton logo? What can we use on it? Just because if you look at, for example, MPs, they have it has House of Commons written on it.
Perhaps through you, Mr. Chair, we could explore that with communications to design something. I would want to make sure that it is distinct enough from the corporate seal, so it doesn't give the pretense that it is a legal binding document that is being sealed.
Do we need to move something here to do that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we can have that discussion offline.
Yeah. Can I just ask for clear, are you talking about this seal here on the card, or the seal, the silver one?
No, it's that orange or gold seal is
So
red
he's talking about
sometimes.
something else.
Through you, I think you're distinguishing the coat of arms. I think that's what
No.
you're referring to on the card.
I think it's the one I got you, the one you
Yeah.
stamp. So we have a seal, round sticker you stamp on, it says
Stamp.
Regional Councillor Pathwood, and you stick it onto your certificate at the bottom. That's the one he's talking
Yeah,
about.
so we just want to figure out what can we use on there. Right now, it just, Councilor Patini had one made for myself. It just basically has your name on it. It says Ward 9 and 10. So I'm just wondering if there can be something that's uniform for everybody that's made. Because the one that, I guess most of the people are using, for the letterheads, are using the design that I worked with comms with last year, the certificate also. It's kind of become like the de facto standard, you could say. But I'm just wondering if this can be something done for the seal as well, because a few of us do use it.
Yeah, so just to clarify, I use it also, just says City of Brampton, Regional Council, Path 14, Ward 7 and 8, and you stamp it, and you peel it, and you put it on the certificate. You are the regional, there's nothing wrong with that.
And that sounds appropriate from what you're suggesting. But for it to be a seal that says anything that gives the indication that this is an official legally binding document, I would say that should be separate and distinct.
Yeah.
So the fact that it's individualized to the member of council, that's fine, and we can work offline with communications in your offices
Okay.
if there is a template that's already in place that can be expanded to the other members of council.
So work offline then, right?
Yes.
Gotcha.
Okay. So let's, I guess we'll move on to question period. Any councillor have any questions? Seeing none, public question, oh, sorry, Paul Vicente?
Thank you. Through you, Chair, to the clerk. Can we just put up on the screen the motion that we passed about 10 minutes ago, please? Just have a question for clarification. So in the motion that was moved by Councillor Madero, is amended by myself and passed, carried. Does that motion in any way, shape, or form restrict a member of council from being able to hire a contractor or external service provider?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it does not. It asks for a report back, and until such time as the report back, the current terms and conditions of the expense policy are in effect, which gives discretion to members of council.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Public question period. From the public. No closed session, so our next meeting adjournment, it will be Monday, November 4th at 9:30 a.m. Motion to adjournment, all in favor? Carried. Thank you.